Long-running franchises like Gundam have to do a lot to stay afloat amongst the modern deluge of anime, wherein I'm surrounded by more tits, ass, and saga than I can shake my dick at, and the stories are good too, I guess. So it's a slippery slope to attract newer, younger viewers when they can't just change the hair colors, but not if they just make it gay. Fuck, that's hot. Gundam Witch is a pioneer in showing that to make a bunch of money on your multi-million-dollar franchise, all you have to do is dangle some Yuri in front of the audience, and then it becomes a multi-billion-dollar franchise. The proof is in the pussy. While the direction the show has gone in may not suit some older fans, it's undeniable that it's been heavily successful for the franchise, as Gunpla and Blu-rays have seen an increase in sales, and the newer fan base as a whole seems to be largely enjoying the show, which of course means that, whether we get a season 2 or not, the next Gundam is almost certainly going to follow similar trends to capitalize on this success. But is that a good thing? Maybe if they fucking made out, it would be. The anime leads with a likable main cast in the form of Tomato, Chickenhead, and Bob, but most of the other characters just kind of exist rather than having anything going for them, outside of a select few like Ellen, but not the barbecue-flavored one, and Shattuck. This leads to a rather weak supporting cast that needs the show to be almost entirely propped up by the aforementioned characters, but you can only watch Chickenhead be strung along by the villain of the week so many times before it starts to get boring, or watch Tomato suffer for 3 episodes in a row before you start to think that maybe, just maybe, you might have a suffering kink. It often does try to get you to care about the side characters, such as the individuals missing from their respective houses in episode 13, but you hardly remember these characters because they get no screen time, and anytime they do, they're extremely one-note with nothing that makes them stand out and be memorable. The show wants you to care about these characters, but why should you when even the anime itself doesn't? The things I'd allow her to do to me would violate the Geneva Convention. This is exacerbated when watching Noria, a side antagonist, break down over non-barbecue Ellen, calling her out on not wanting to actually pilot a Gundam and die, because who would? The character was forced into this type of terrorist combat and was bottling up her feelings after her friend Sophie died in the 14th episode, and Ellen connects with that because he's also been seen as disposable for the entire series, so it is understandable why she'd feel the way she does with proper build-up, but he literally says one thing to piss her off in the previous episode, and then she's suddenly psycho mode in the following episode and wailing and crying, which even confused this chick. The intention was understood, and I knew what the anime was going for and wanting me to feel for the character, but it did a piss poor job at giving her any focus or making her endearing. She gets all of 2 scenes, one in which she's a badass and kills a bunch of dudes in episode 12, and the other in which she randomly kills a seemingly innocent student, and it likewise doesn't help that her relapse comes out of nowhere, all because they wanted the payoff of plain-flavored Ellen building a relationship with someone, because that's what sells, but they didn't want to spend the time building up to it, despite the fact that, you know, she did this. But on the bright side, the anime can be, and sometimes is, fantastic. The use of dynamic camera angles like in episode 14 really helps to set the mood, and the action itself is usually a treat to watch. It doesn't always look the best, but it can be forgiven considering they're animating multiple fights an episode between 2D giant robots on a seasonal anime schedule, and it's made up for anyways by the music being absolutely stellar. That matches the accelerated pace of the combat to a T and even allows for comedic moments amidst epic battles.
Oh no!
On the writing front, using the duality between Tomato and Bob in the duel in episode 17 via the duel speech to show their different development was brilliant. It's subtle, but Tomato reciting part of the speech with her voice actor reading it very confidently versus Bob's with his voice actor sounding solemn shows how Tomato has stagnated without realizing it, as she relies solely on Aryan combat, whilst Bob, the person Tomato helped grow, has learned his lesson that pride only gets in the way, and that's what led to the events that happened to him, such as the death of his father. No, he can't. What appeared to be strong character on Tomato's side in the first episode, as if she were the Kamina from Gurren Lagann of this show, and that she was an already fully developed character before the show even began, turned out to actually be an empty character manipulated through puppetry via Prospera. Bob, meanwhile, had his Simone arc and realized that he needs to rely on others, plus his own skill, fully understanding the motto recited for the duels. In this brief moment, it masterfully shows a character that was weak but has become strong, versus a character that the audience thought was strong, but was proven to be the weakest of them all, and this later ties into Tomato's growth as well. No, not that growth. Because despite all her suffering after that duel, Tomato maintains that who she is as a person isn't just because of her mother's programming, because she is also a pacifist deep down, and this was hinted at in episode 12 when Tomato crosses the line for Prospera but is shown to be crying while doing so. She's always known something was off, but having her realize that her mother was a bad person through her experience with Bob, and realizing that Eri was always doing her best to protect her via the the actions of Martin, one of her friends, is good writing, even doubly so when she refuses to give up on them even after they both betrayed her. It not only ties into the previous episodes to lead up to this development, but it also shows that the core values of what makes her prevented the tomato from going on a grim dark path, and rather than sulking, she took the programming into her own hands and moved forward, mostly because that fat bitch was hungry, and used everything she learned up until now to finally grow out of her program shell, with the anime even further showing this change by getting rid of her stutter and shyness in the episodes that follow, in addition to showing her having babies. Aw, they have her eyes. The anime does have strong writing and direction, but these moments are few and far between and are largely buried under all the corporate mandated nonsense, to the point where it's obvious that they weren't given enough time to properly cook, and instead they rushed the anime out in a haste to sell toys, which unfortunately worked. But I'm okay with it. Because of this, every episode is either constant melodrama, usually for a character you couldn't give less of a shit about, or just awkwardly and awfully paced, which is by far the worst issue with the anime overall. It wants to be this massive space epic with multiple intertwined factions, but it never takes a moment to set any of them up, and, at most, mentions them once or twice several episodes before, and then suddenly expects you to remember them when they bring them up near the end of the series.
There were lesbians! Aren't lesbians!
Episode 19 is a perfect example wherein they'll throw several faction names at you, such as Ox, Earth, and Vanitas, both of which were from the prologue and mentioned only a handful of times outside of that, as well as the Space Assembly League, Cathedra, and more, but they're all so underdeveloped that you will quite literally need to either go back and search for the rare few times they were mentioned, or resort to Google even if you were paying attention. But all my searches are just tomato smut. The anime wants its cake and to eat it too, in that it wants to focus on the school setting to appease and appeal to new fans, but also wants to still have its traditional Gundam setups with multiple factions that are neither necessarily good or bad going against each other, but they never took the time to properly establish the latter half to begin with, so most viewers are either left completely confused or just don't give a shit about what's happening whenever Tomato isn't on the screen. Not that I can blame them, just look at her. Oh, she's a raccoon now. When they try to force conflict, like this dipshit getting shot at by a tank that clearly didn't affect his mech, yet still going apeshit and killing a bunch of people anyway, it makes it look even sillier. Right after this, they even show some pretty cool imagery of a kid crying while looking up at a mobile suit, but it just feels so ham-fisted and unearned that you can't help but laugh. They do the bare minimum of showing us the conflict with Earth through Bob, and next to nothing for the other factions, yet we'll still expect the audience to feel sad that war just broke out and people are dying. And while the show is telling me, and in the case of Prospera, actively showing me, that it has several moving parts, the way it cautiously meanders through everything just doesn't make it feel like Prospera was this intense big bad with a master plan that has continually escalated to this point, but rather that she's just a goober who's been taking advantage of things that are happening and said things like any actual oomph or impact, with the exception of this scene. Things are certainly happening, but it just doesn't feel like they are, and this can be attributed not only to the poor plot structuring, but also the absolutely atrocious fucking pacing caused by the show's insistence to constantly have a downtime or return to status quo episode. For example, episode 13 comes off the heels of Tomato Paste, but tries to return to the status quo of students in school meandering about before completely destroying that in the very next episode. So rather than wasting an entire episode on it, they could have instead included the 5 minutes of important bits into the 14th episode, cut the opening and ending, and then made that the 13th episode to reintroduce the series for part 2. It greatly improves the pacing and sets the mood for the second half of the series before following it up with a break from the main plot to follow Bob and his wacky adventures, which is an actual good use of a downtime episode, as it helps to establish one of the other factions, as well as grow Bob as a character. He's so precious. Rather than letting the show continue to ramp up more and more in its second half to get you more and more excited, it just suffers from the same problem as the first half, and it negatively affects the anime as a whole. It could be a fun train wreck, but there's just way too many good things hiding under the hood to allow it to be so, and it's only this way because it's trying to check a bunch of boxes despite only properly setting up a couple of them. The rest feel shoehorned in as a result, and it continues to stay in the limbo of neither genuinely good or an enjoyably bad time because of it, despite having 10 out of 10 scenes like tomato sex. I wanna fuck her.